3 Little Pigs. A mother pig had 3 little baby pigs. One day she said, "You've grown too big for my little house. It's time you go and have houses of your own." Following their mother's request, the 3 little pigs went on their own to build houses for themselves. The first little pig decided to build his house with straw. "It will only take me a couple of hours," he said to the others. "It will be too fragile," advised the other pigs, but the first little pig didn't hear them and quickly built his house with straw and snugged inside. Not quite as lazy as the first little pig, the second little pig decided to build his house with sticks. "It will only take me 1 day," he said. And in 1 day, the second little pig built his house and snugged inside, while the third little pig advised him, "To build a strong house, you need more hard work than that." Having decided to use brick, the third little pig was taking several days to build his house while his brothers were playing in the meadow. After much effort, the third little pig finished his house that had solid, thick walls. That was when the 3 little pigs saw the big, bad wolf and went running to lock themselves in, safe at home. The wolf arrived at the straw house and said, little pig, let me in." "No, Mr. Wolf," replied the pig. So the wolf huffed and puffed and blew down the house. The little pig managed to run to his brother's stick house, but the wolf came to his door too and said, little pigs, let me in." "We won't let you in, Mr. Wolf," replied the 2 little pigs. So the wolf huffed and puffed and blew the house down. The 2 little pigs ran in panic to the brick house. Soon the wolf came to the door. Little pigs, let me come in," he said. "Oh, no, we won't," said the pigs. The wolf huffed and puffed and huffed and puffed. He huffed and puffed even harder, but he couldn't blow the house down. He then looked around for a way in. The wolf jumped onto the roof and looked down the chimney. Having heard the noise on the roof, the 3 little pigs put a big pot of water on the stove. The wolf slid down the chimney and fell into the big pot of hot water. One little pig placed a lid on top of the pot and said, "That's the end of the big, bad wolf." "You can all live with me in my house," said the third little pig, "and a big, bad wolf can never, ever frighten us again." The end. The Steadfast Tin Soldier. There were once 25 tin soldiers made from the same old tin spoon. The first thing they heard was a little boy clapping his hands and crying, "Soldiers! Soldiers!" It was this little boy's birthday, and the soldiers were his gift, so he spared no time in setting them up on the table. All the soldiers were exactly alike except for one who only had 1 leg, for he was made last, and there was not quite enough tin left to finish him. However, he stood just as well on his 1 leg as the others did on 2. There were many other toys in the room, but what caught the eye of the 1-legged tin soldier was a delightful paper castle that had a little maiden standing at the castle's door. The maiden was wearing a beautiful spangle. She, too, was cut out of paper and was stretching both arms, for she was a dancer. In her dancer's pose, one of her legs was raised so high into the air that it was invisible to the tin soldier. He supposed that she, like him, had just one leg. She would be the perfect wife for me, he thought. But she is much too grand. She lives in a castle while I only have a box, and then there are 25 of us to share it. But yet I must try to meet her. So he hid full length behind a snuff box which stood on the table and waited for the perfect opportunity to meet her. Late in the evening, the other soldiers were put back into the box, and the people of the house went to bed. Now was the time for the toys to play. Every toy jumped and danced, except for the tin soldier and the little dancer. She stood as stiff as ever on tiptoe, and he was equally firm on his one leg, not taking his eyes off of her for one moment. When the clock struck 12, up flew the lid of the snuff box, and a little black goblin popped out from the inside. "Tin soldier," said the goblin, "keep your eyes to yourself." But the tin soldier feigned not to hear. "Tomorrow you'll be sorry," said the goblin. In the morning, when the children got up, they put the tin soldier on the window frame, and whether it was caused by the goblin or by a puff of wind, the window burst open and the soldier fell head first from the 3rd story down to the wet street. After a while, 2 children found the tin soldier. "He shall go for a sail," one said. So they made a boat out of newspaper, put the soldier in it, and they saw him sail away down the gutter on the wet street. All at once the boat drifted under a long wooden tunnel, and it became as dark as it was in his box. "Where on earth am I going to now?" he thought. "It is all the fault of that goblin. Oh, if only the little maiden were with me." At that moment, a big water rat that lived in the tunnel appeared. "Have you a pass?" asked the rat. The tin soldier did not speak, but clung tighter to his gun. The boat rushed on as the rat ran close behind him. "Stop him! Stop him! He hasn't paid the toll!" screamed the rat. But the current grew stronger and stronger, and the tin soldier could already see daylight before him at the end of the tunnel. But he also heard a roaring sound that could strike terror in the bravest heart. Yet the poor tin soldier held himself as stiff as he could and didn't wince. The boat swirled round 3 or 4 times and filled with water. The tin soldier stood up to his neck in water as the boat sank deeper and deeper. At last the water went over his head, and he thought of the pretty little dancer, whom he was never to see again. As the soldier was sinking, he was swallowed by a big fish. "How dark it is inside this fish! It is worse than being in the tunnel," he thought. But he stayed dauntless, shouldering his gun. After some time it became quite quiet, and he saw a flash of lightning. The soldier was once more in the broad daylight, and he heard a voice call out loudly, "A tin soldier!" The fish had been caught and brought into the kitchen, where the cook cut it open with a large knife. She took the soldier and carried him into the parlor. She set him up on the table, and wonders of wonders, he found himself in the very same room that he had been in before. The same toys were still standing on the table, as well as the beautiful castle with the pretty little dancer. She still stood on one leg and held the other up in the air. The soldier was so moved that he was about to shed tears of tin, but that would not have been fitting. He looked at her and she looked at him, but they never said a word. At this moment, one of the little boys, without reason, threw the tin soldier into the fire. No doubt the little goblin in the snuff box was to blame for that. The tin soldier stood there in the most horrible heat. But whether it was the heat of the real fire or the warmth of his feelings for the dancer, he did not know. He looked at the little maiden and she looked at him. A door was suddenly opened. The draft caught the little dancer and she flooded like a sylph straight into the fire. To the soldier, was lit up by the fire and was gone. By this time the soldier was reduced to a mere lump of coal. When the maid took away the ashes the next morning, she found him in the shape of a small tin heart. All that was left of the dancer was her spangle that was burnt as black as coal. The tin soldier and the dancer lived together forever in their ashes. The end.
The Story of the Prince with Donkey Ears. Once upon a time there lived a king and queen who were very unhappy because they couldn't have any children. They decided to go deep into the woods and meet the three fairies: the beautiful fairy, the intelligent fairy, and the wise fairy. After listening to the king, the fairies decided to grant him the wish of a son. The beautiful fairy said, "My wish is that your son will be the most handsome of all men." Then the intelligent fairy said, "My wish is for your son to be very, very smart." Then came the wise fairy, who said to everyone's astonishment, "And my wish for the prince is for him to have the ears of a donkey." And then the three fairies disappeared. The prince was born, and as the years passed, he indeed grew into a beautiful and intelligent boy. Yet, one day, the king noticed that two small donkey ears were starting to grow on the prince's head. Ashamed, he decreed that the prince was to use a special hat that would cover his ears, and that he was never to take it off. The prince was not to know about his donkey ears. As he grew older, the prince got used to everybody praising him for his beauty and his brains, and as a result, the prince soon became vain and would criticize everyone around him. Nobody was good enough for the prince. Their head was too big, or their legs were too short, or they were too dumb. Everyone had faults, except, of course, for him. He was the perfect prince. But the prince's hair had grown very long, and so the king decided to call the royal barber to give the prince a haircut. When the royal barber took the prince's hat off, he was surprised, as was the prince, to see the donkey ears. The king quickly said to the man, "If you tell this to anyone, I'll send you to prison for life." So the barber cut the prince's hair and kept the secret, and the prince stayed in the palace, where he was very, very sad. But several days passed, and the barber could no longer keep that secret to himself. So he decided to leave the village and walk out to the meadow, where he dug a hole deep in the ground, and into it he yelled,
"The prince has donkey ears! The prince has donkey ears!"
Feeling relieved, the barber went back home. Soon thereafter, a reed field grew upon that ground, and every time the wind would blow, it seemed to whisper, "The prince has donkey ears! The prince has donkey ears!" People started to get suspicious, and they began whispering to each other that the hat the prince always wore was used to hide his donkey ears. And soon everyone started to make fun of the prince. One day the prince pulled off his hat and said to all the villagers, "Yes, it's true. I have donkey ears, and I'm so sorry that in the past I would point out all your faults, unaware I could have even bigger ones." At that moment, the wise fairy appeared and said, "See, little prince, if it wasn't for me, you would have turned into a vain and selfish man. You need donkey ears no more." And with a wave of her wand, the donkey ears disappeared. And the prince turned into a good and compassionate man who, whenever he heard someone making fun of others, would say, "Be careful, my friend. You never know when you'll get donkey ears." The end.